right? No, not Jimmy. Jimmy Stewart. I knew that wasn't right. Dirty bombs. Jimmy Stewart has all these strapped. It's like a football team. No, we'll just stay here on the farm and farm that while you guys fight. That's not going to happen. The formula that I've come up with is that a lot of these guys may not have been fighting for slavery, but they were fighting to create a nation based on slavery. Right? So there's not an easy answer to all this, except that people who want to say, it's just my heritage, need to realize that when you inherit something, you inherit all of it, not just the parts that you want. I see people nodding, so I will act as if that's the end of that answer. What else we got? Yes?
Doctor, for emancipated slaves going to countries like Canada or Mexico, what kind of legal protections did they have? I come from a border state, or border city,
Right.
New York. Just wondered, with the Underground Railroad and different places,
Yeah.
did the bounty hunters have the right
No.
to go back and then grab the slaves that were?
No, that's why Canada was the real North Star. A lot of the North is not very safe at all. When Lee comes into Gettysburg, into Pennsylvania, one of the first things they do is drag people back into slavery. They actually use their military power to catch runaway slaves and take them back into Maryland and into Virginia. But Canada, you would have been safe. In Canada, you would have been safe. Yes, behind you. Yes, there was talk of the 40 acres and the mule. It was always it was never had time to really be implemented. And so General O.O. Howard comes down there and has to tell the freed people that the United States government is not going to do that. So, but yes, is the answer.
John, the other one is about the Confederate flag.
Yeah.
South Carolina.
I don't believe I mentioned the Confederate flag. How am I getting into this? But I was trying to think about, the answer is yes, but there's not been a national apology for slavery? I was under the impression that there had been.
What was that?
Does anybody know? Am I not right?
I don't think so. It's been proposed, but it's never happened.
Yeah. No, but I guess I will, if you allow me to give a broader answer to your good question. South Africa adopted apartheid from the South's segregation, very self-consciously. But South Africa, with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, has done something we've never done, which is to look all of this history directly in the face. We keep doing it in little pieces along the way. It's my impression, I've been fighting the Civil War since 1859 or 2009 here. I've been at all these different kinds of things and have many conversations like this, is that there is a sense that there's still an evasiveness of the country not willing to recognize the role in tolerating slavery for centuries, longer than we are from the Civil War now. They had slavery. And I think that I hoped that maybe the sesquicentennial will be a time for deeper soul searching than we've actually found. I've not found people too eager to dig into it, especially in the North. I think that instead it's better to feel like the Lincoln movie. Here's the sacrifice. Here's what was won. We already know the story, and there it is again. So it's not a really good answer to your question, but there are other hands, so I'll move on. Yes, sir.
Good day, sir. Thank you very much for that presentation.
Thank you.
I enjoyed it. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Bob Shaidu from the Canadian Forces, the terminus of the Freedom Railroad that you were saying before.
Thank you.
I've always been interested in the U.S. Civil War, especially living here and getting to visit the battlefields and reading the books. The North won fair and square, but then afterwards, it's like the South won the peace. Why did the the country not impose itself on the South to make sure that everybody was free and it was fair for everyone?
What a great question. Why did the North not press itself harder after the war? Because they valued putting the country back together over black freedom and equality and opportunity. For decades afterwards, people voted as they shot. The Democrats still voted for the South, and the Republicans still voted for the North, but you had elections settled by 1 or 2%, closest elections in American history. And after 1876 and the election in which basically the guy who won the most votes did not win the election, and the Republican comes into office, they thought they were going to be marching in the streets. They thought the Civil War might break out again. I think that white Americans say, it's been enough, okay? They've got their titular rights down in the South, the black people. We sacrificed 350,000 lives. And one thing we need to remember, if the Civil War occurred today and lost the same percentage of the population, it's 7 million people as we think about this. And so part of that is that. You know, we've all seen weariness after wars. I think this is that on the largest scale that we've ever seen it. But what it fundamentally is about is they leave the white South to determine the future of the black South and walk away from it. Now, individuals are brave and bold. White school teachers come down and help for a while. But by the 1880s and 1890s, the United States has put that chapter behind them and ignores African American rights by and large until African Americans themselves in Alabama and Georgia and Virginia impose it again on the nation. You know, black Southerners find the moral wherewithal within themselves to hold on for 100 years and then to win the next level of the battle. So I think actually what I said is true. I think most historians would agree with that, so I will pretend that was satisfactory. Yes, sir. I'm sorry. You had your hand up before, and I want to make sure I didn't overlook you.
Hi.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for coming. You're taking me back to my days at UVA, actually. I took your class in the spring of 2007.
I didn't use any of the same jokes and stuff, did I?
Not that I can
Okay.
recall, but I'm actually really interested in how you're using technology. You demonstrated it in a few ways today.
Right.
I remember using some similar tools at UVA. How are you using that to, increase our understanding of the complex dynamics that we're
Great, thanks. So she was asking about, after she said she remembered you as her favorite professor, I think you said, and how are we using these tools? You know, you would think that we would have made more progress in understanding some of these issues than we have. How many times can you read the same quotes from Abraham Lincoln and try to figure out what he really meant? And we cycle through this over and over again. Or how many times can you see, if they just taken Pickett's charge? Okay? All those things are important. But now we have billions of words of all the newspapers available to us in the first time. We're able to do something like take 127 volumes of official records of the War of the Rebellion and put them in a form that you can actually see what patterns they make on the maps. You can say, instead of just arguing about what Virginians say, why don't we let any middle school kid who actually wants to read what they said when they seceded do so and look for the patterns within it. I'm trying to create a more participatory history in which you don't just have to wait and hope that some historian says what you believe, that you can challenge the orthodoxy, you can look for it yourself, but you actually have evidence to back up your point. That's how we can just nope, it was just economics. Well, we're actually trying to build tools that you could actually show what it might be. So I see this as a kind of democratizing of history. First, by including everybody in the story, including the 18-year-old women with babies who are risking their lives to get to the Union soldiers. But then also putting that history in a form that anybody with a computer anywhere can actually explore for themselves what it might be. So I see the two purposes linked. Yes, sir.
Sir, as a Georgian with great-granddaddies, both of whom were in the Civil War, I took a different turn and became a student of Russia all my life. And one thing about Russia, they always, through the years, point out that Alexander declared their Emancipation Declaration, I think they called it, in 1861 on March the 1st. And the second thing is, I have found that Gone with the Wind is by far one of the most popular
Yes.
books, even in Soviet times, there. And I do know that Alexander and Lincoln had a correspondence, although I admit I haven't really looked into it the way that I should have. But do you know anything about the relationship of what was going on in Russia with efforts to abolish serfdom and so forth, and what influence they might have had on our situation?
I don't know what the politest way to say no is, or the most face-saving way. What we do know, let's see if you'll accept this as for partial credit.
Well, I need to.
Yeah, which is that, there have been a lot of studies of late, and by the way, I know people have to do things at 4 o'clock, so it doesn't hurt my feelings if you need to leave, so I did that. So, quickly, that England and France looked at this and tried the war and tried to figure out what they should do. And recent scholarship says they saw it as a humanitarian crisis of the suffering of civilians and of the soldiers, and assumed that because if even Russia abolishes serfdom, that slavery will eventually be abolished. So they think about coming into the war to help end it, because if it's a humanitarian crisis as a war, with the confidence that slavery will eventually end. This is not the way that we've been used to thinking about it. But you go back and look at that big book called A World on Fire about the English response to all of this. So I think people look at this, and that's given us some of the sense later, after the Civil War, that was a wasteless, a useless waste of life, that slavery would have come to an end anyway because it did everywhere else, Brazil and Cuba after this. And I think it's a question for us to ask, how much is it worth to have shaved off decades or generations of slavery, and to have brought an end to it? So it is part of a global drama. I guess I would maybe leave us with this quote. I'm happy to talk about questions as long as people want to. I don't know how long I should go.
We'll go a few more minutes.
Okay.
And if you're willing to stay.
I am. But I would say this. I was doing this, so I knew it was going to be an awesome point. But what was it that I was going to be? That the idea that North American slavery was going to fade away as it had in Russia, there's no reason to believe that it was going to happen anytime soon. And I think that we used to tell ourselves that was a waste of life because it would have gone anyway. It's hard to see it going away within the perspective of the people at the time. It's easier to see it getting stronger and pushing us into wars to expand it. So, yes, sir.
Another heritage question.
Yeah?
You talk about the stars and bars disappearing from across the Old South. Within that context, what's going to happen in your own city of Richmond to Monument Avenue statues?
Great question.
Not Arthur Ashe's, but...
Yeah. So, great question is, what's going to happen in Richmond, where we've actually been having, I think, maybe the most active conversation in the country, called The Future of Richmond's Past, an interracial conversation about this. And I've been invited to the Islamic Cultural Center to talk about this, and Virginia Asian Chamber of Commerce to talk about this. And we'll have Civil War and Emancipation Day again, the fourth time in April, in which every museum is open and people come in, and the United Daughters of the Confederacy open up their doors, and African Americans come in and see this, and we're trying to move on. What do you do with that row of statues to Confederate leaders? Robin Williams came and did a show, and he said, "I've never seen so many second-place trophies in my life." But I think, as we've talked about it, more history rather than less is the answer. People don't know that those were put up 25, 30, 40 years after the war, sometimes for real estate speculation. It's a beginning of a subdivision. Sometimes just to say, our black friends, don't forget who's in control here. This is our demonstration of that. Sincere respect for the warrior qualities of these men. But people need to remember, they are history too. They don't just grow up naturally out of the blood-soaked soil of the Confederacy. They were put there for a reason. And I think if people understand that they're building statues to Jefferson Davis in the 1920s, why is that in the context of the 1920s? So I think we need to interpret things more. I don't think we can't just erase history in this country, but we do need to explain it. That sounded remotely like a conclusion. And so rather than establishing eye contact with anybody else who has their hand up, I'm just going to thank you so much for coming here today. Thank you. Thank you.
I won't really make closing remarks. I just want, and we already gave you a very great round of applause. On behalf of all the history offices, I'd like to present you with the OSB score coin. And thank you again.